All right, for those of you joining us on the recording, which I forgot to start until just now, welcome to week 4 seminar. I'm going to now share the screen yet again. All right, and just to recap, last call for the Unit 1 reading guide was yesterday, was Wednesday. If you missed that, sorry. Make sure you're fully submitting. Just click and check anything you submit to Moodle. Just do that. Just check it. You don't have to email me to check it. You don't have to message me. Please don't do that. You can check for yourself right on Moodle. Easy peasy. Unit 1 test due on Friday. Last call next Wednesday. Don't live in that grace period. Get it done early. Eventually, if you're treating Wednesday as the deadline repeatedly, that's going to bite you in the butt at some point. I promise you that. There is no discussion forum this week. So you have that little bit of extra time. Not that the discussion forums should be taking you hours and hours. They're really short things, just like the seminar work, short things. Please join the Remind for the class. Please join the Remind. It is so helpful to me. That was highlighted as I was trying to contact people today who had not fully submitted their reading guides. And about half of them were on the Remind. So easy. Tap on their name, type them a quick message, boom, sent. The other half I had to look in PowerSchool. About half of those had cell phones listed in PowerSchool. I texted them. But if you don't text me back, I have no idea if my message was received or not. So with those folks, I also typically messaged a parent. And the parents aren't great about texting me back either. So pretty please join the Remind. If you're not on the Remind, you are missing really pressing announcements that I have to get out quickly. That's where I put them. So if you're not on the Remind, you're missing that stuff. And then I end up regurgitating it to you as you email me and, oh, what time is this thing? What's this? And then I have to say again what I already said over the Remind. And that's when I lose my cherub-like demeanor. Week 4 seminar assignments, make sure you're getting these done. The Week 4 CNN 10 news quiz. By the way, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I post this on Tuesday. If you want to take it Tuesday, hop on, hey, it's there. Watch it, take the quiz. You could be 10 minutes late to this session. No problem. And if you're in both Montana Government Studies and U.S. History, you only have to take it once. I have check boxes for the class that you're in, so you can select that you're in, Montana Government Studies and whatever section of U.S. History you're in, so that you don't have to take the quiz twice. I only count your first attempt anyway. So the CNN 10 news quiz, always easy peasy, always at least one question that, as long as you read it, you're going to get it whether you watched the video or not, if you have a modicum of common sense. And then the Week 4 seminar journal. And when I post the presentation deck, which I do every week, that I do something based on a slideshow, it's the last slide. It's the last page of that document. If you don't want to watch the seminar, really and truly, and you think that you can answer whatever question I've posted. Incidentally, that's always a pretty decent preview of a test question, because I very frequently will draw one of the things that I've asked you about for the journal into an essay question on the test. But if if you watched the video and you can't remember the seminar journal topic, last page of that document, boom, there it is. And you can do the seminar journal. Easy peasy. And I'm not asking for a master's treatise. I'm talking 2-3 sentences on that. It's not a huge deal. And again, join the Remind. Okay, any questions about the announcements? All right. So I figured, since it's test week and I don't like to do quote unquote content stuff for the chapter during a test week, I thought what we would talk about is the Montana Legislature for a couple reasons. Number one, they're currently meeting. So it would be nice if, as you are looking at current events, which, by the way, and I forgot to put this in the announcement, your first current event, big, uh, whatever I'm calling those, ongoing projects, there we go, is due this week, is due Friday. You again have the grace period to Wednesday, but don't live in it. So as you're looking at current events, it might be nice if you had a functional understanding of the Montana legislature, so that as you're reading some of that news, you're not going, well, what does that mean? So that's reason number one. And number two, this class is what I like to call a Franken class. We're talking history, we're talking government, we're talking geography, we do current events. I mean, there's so much going on in this one semester class. It's absolutely ridiculous. So this kind of counts a little bit as a current event, but also as sort of government. So we're kind of going away from history to a certain extent and piling into the government train. So Montana legislature, and I'm being a bit sarcastic here when I call it the biennial circus that comes to Helena, although a little bit. Okay, so like most representative bodies on the state or federal level, the Montana legislature is made up of two houses. I copped the Shakespeare, but yeah. By the way, who can tell me what Shakespeare play is that from? This is your cross-content thing for today.
Isn't it Romeo and Juliet?
Yes! Ding, 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 ding! Absolutely, Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. My freshman English teacher when I was in high school made us memorize that. Still know it. All right, so currently, the Montana legislature has two houses, and that's how it has been at least since the 70s, and I believe before that as well. There is a House of Representatives, and there is a Senate. So very much mirror to the federal system, right, where we have a House of Representatives and a Senate. Currently, in the Montana House of Representatives, there are 67 Republican representatives and 33 Democratic Party representatives in that body, for a total of 100 members of the Montana House. And then in the Montana Senate, there are 50 senators. So how that basically works is, for every 2 House seats, there's 1 seat in the Senate. And so that's how it's broken down. And I forgot to, for some reason, I forgot to include a legislative map in all of this because I'm dumb. But if you look at a legislative map, if you look at a map of House districts, you'll see there are a lot more of them, obviously. But then if you look at the same map with Senate districts, all the Senate districts are basically double the size of a House district because it's 2 House districts that make up a Senate district. Okay, so in the Montana Senate, there are 31 Republicans, 19 Democrats, for a total of 150 members of the Montana legislature. Okay, so the session, according to the Montana Constitution, this is laid out in the Montana Constitution, which was ratified and written in 1972. Okay, so this is actually a fairly modern document compared to the U.S. Constitution that was written in 1789. Written in 87, ratified by 89. Pardon me. So according to the 1972 Montana Constitution, which, side note, is a really cool document that we will study a little more later in the semester. So the Montana legislature meets during odd-numbered years. So the elections take place in even-numbered years. So the general election is always the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Okay, so sometimes that's as early as November 2nd, sometimes that's as late as like November 10th. So first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, even numbered years, that is what we call a general election. Every 4 years, that's a presidential election. Also in Montana, a gubernatorial election, as well as Secretary of State, Attorney General, etc. Okay, but every 2 years, we elect every member of the Montana House of Representatives, the same way we elect every member of the U.S. House of Representatives every 2 years. Okay, same kind of deal. The Montana legislature then meets starting the following January. So election is an even numbered year in November. The legislature starts meeting in January of the next year. That's an odd numbered year. And meets for no more than 90 days in that odd numbered year. So their session lasts no longer than 90 days. Typically, they adjourn right on the nose. 90 days, they're done. Every now and again, you will have a situation where they're done with everything they want to accomplish, and it's day 87 or something like that, and they adjourn what's called sine die. Sinedie, and that means in finality. They're not coming back. They're done. Tootsie goodbye. Okay, so members of the Montana House of Representatives, which is the chamber that you see part of here. By the way, that big painting right behind that's called the rostrum. That is by Charles Marion Russell. So the members of the House serve 2-year terms. Members of the Senate are elected to 4-year terms. So almost mirroring the federal system where members of the House have 2-year terms, members of the Senate have 6-year terms. So slightly different, but basically you got your same idea. Members of the Senate don't face election as often. Legislators now, in Montana, which is not the case on the federal level, there are term limits to how long a legislator can serve in office. They can serve 8 years in each house in a 16-year period. So what you see a lot of these folks do is, so let's say they will start in the House of Representatives, and they will serve 4 terms, boom, 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 in the Montana House of Representatives. They will then turn around and run for a term in the Montana Senate for a 4-year term, and they will serve then, if they're elected, 2 terms in the Montana Senate. Now, at that point, they could theoretically go back to the House and do 4 more terms, and then go back to the Senate 2 terms. And they could go back and forth. And there are a couple people that do that. For the most part, however, once you've served 16 years in the legislature, most of those people go, yeah, this is a headache, I'm done. Which I can understand. Okay, so priority 1 for the Montana legislature, this is the most important thing they have to do every other year, is they have to set a balanced budget for the state for a 2-year period. We call that the biennium. Okay, biennium means 2-year period. Now, unlike the federal government, the state government cannot spend more than it takes in. The federal government can do something called deficit spending, where they do not have to balance their books at all. Basically, the federal government can just kind of keep printing money, selling bonds, and it doesn't matter how much they take in taxes, they can spend more than that. Okay, which they're a government. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If there's a big crisis, you don't want the federal government going, well, what are we going to cut so that we can, go clean up after this hurricane, right? So having the federal government able to deficit spend isn't necessarily a bad thing Always. Sometimes, yeah, it's not great. Um, the states, on the other hand, they are not allowed to do that. They have to balance their books. So, if, let's say, revenue declines sharply over the course of the biennium, then they may have to come back for a special session to rebalance that budget. Or there's some kind of big catastrophic thing that happens. They may have to come back in a special session to address that so that the budget balances again. So you can see the breakdown of the Montana biennial budget. This was from 2019. We don't have a breakdown for this year's yet because it is still being debated. So you can see Health and Human Services, 42% of the budget went to that. Education, 26%. Natural Resources, Transportation, 18%. Judicial Branch, Law Enforcement, Justice, 8%, and then general government 6%, and everything falls under that. Somebody in the Wednesday session asked, what part of that accounts for military? Absolutely none. Okay, this is the state budget. The military is a federal thing. Now, that being said, one of the things that allows Montana to be as prosperous as we are, especially around here in Great Falls, is the fact that we have a military base here. So the state government, as well as our federal representatives on the national level, do devote a fair amount of time and resources to keeping Malmstrom open. There has been talk of closing Malmstrom. If that were to happen, Great Falls would become kind of Havre, I guess, or Glasgow used to have a military base back in like the 40s and 50s. And if you've ever been to Glasgow, you'll know the kind of small town that now is. Not that it was ever as big as Great Falls. But yeah, Great Falls would be a ghost town if Malmstrom ever packs up and leaves. So, yeah. The main work of passing the Montana budget is always, and I won't make you memorize a ton of bill numbers, okay, because they always change, but there are two of them that I'm going to suggest that you commit to memory, and that's because they are always the same every legislative session. The first one is called House Bill 2, or HB 2. The budget always starts in the Montana House of Representatives, just like all money stuff on the federal level always starts in the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, that's by statute. Okay, so House Bill 2, HB 2, is always the main budget bill. Now, they may have other bills to appropriate certain funds here and there, but almost without exception, the main budget is always House Bill 2. So keep that in your brain, and as you're reading news about the legislature, you can, when they say, oh, HB 2, you go, oh, that's the budget bill. And you go, okay, that's what they're talking about. And so depending on how the legislature feels is how they fund certain things. So, and it's a reflection of what they value to a certain extent. So if they appropriate more money for, say, Health and Human Services or education, then they value those things. If they cut those areas and, let's say, put more money into law enforcement or transportation type stuff, then those are the things that they value. Okay, so this is a statement of the values of the legislature as well as the governor. Okay, because the governor actually prepares, House Bill 2 is the governor's bill that he, or one day she, prepares sort of with legislative leaders. And that's sort of the template they go off of. And they can make changes to it, but that's kind of where the governor and the legislature are focusing their attention. Okay, so HB 2 actually very, very important. And I mean, a lot of these things are things that people rely on. In the Health and Human Services budget, you have aid for families and funding for like county health departments and things like that. So, and education, obviously, lots of money for your local school district, though, in my opinion, not enough. But that's me. You're free to disagree with me on that. Okay, you do not need to memorize this entire list, but I did throw this in there. This is a list of committees of the House of Representatives. So all members of the House are on, I think it's at least 4 committees. So this includes agriculture, appropriations, business and labor, education, ethics, energy, technology and federal relations, fish, wildlife and parks, human services, judiciary, legislative administration, local government, natural resources, rules, state administration, taxation, and transportation. Some of these meet weekly during the session. Some of them are what are known as on call, like they don't have anything to do until they do, and so then they schedule a meeting. Okay, and so most legislators, most members of the House are on at least like 4 of these, because there's only 100 members of the House. They've got to get through all this work. And so basically what the committees do is they take the first pass at all of these bills, and there are tons of bills coming before the legislature every session. Most of the consideration of those bills happens in the committees. The committees then make a recommendation. They say, yes, the legislature should pass this. They can say, no, we don't think the legislature should pass this, but we think everybody should debate it anyway. Or they can stop a bill right in the committee. They can go, yeah, no, we're not passing this out. We're just going to keep it here, and it's going to die here. Right? That's called tabling. Okay. So again, this is just sort of divide and conquer, get through everything, because there are so many bills before the legislature every session. And then the Senate has its own committees. You will notice a lot of these sound similar to the House committees, but not exactly the same. They do not all have identical names. Why that is, I'm not certain. But yeah, the Senate just has different names for things. So agriculture, livestock, and economic affairs. Business, labor, and economic affairs. Committee on committees. That sounds absolutely esoteric and awful. Education and cultural resources, energy and telecommunications, ethics, finance and claims, fish and game, highways and transportation, judiciary, that one has a House equivalent, legislative administration, local government, natural resources, public health, welfare and safety, rules, state administration, and taxation. So all of those are standing committees of the Montana State Senate. And the Senate committees tend to be smaller. There aren't as many senators, so there aren't as many bodies on those committees, but each senator is on, like I said, like 4 committees, simply because they need to get through all the business. Some of them are on more than that, but 4 is I believe, sort of the standard. Incidentally, this is a House committee that the picture is of, because that's the back of my buddy Casey Schreiner's head. He used to be the House Minority Leader. But there we go. All right, and then there are 6 committees that have both members of the House and members of the Senate on them, and they are used to basically develop joint things, because in order for a law to become a law, it has to pass an identical form both in the House and the Senate, and this sort of helps them to do that. So joint appropriations subcommittees include education, general government, health and human services, judicial branch, law enforcement and justice, long-range planning, and natural resources and transportation. And again, this is primarily to sort of hammer out differences in legislation so that it can get passed by both houses so that it can become law. And also deals with budgetary stuff for all of those areas. The other House bill, the other bill that I'm suggesting that you know the number of, okay? And like I said, in most sessions, HB 120 is different every time. But every year, the state employee pay plan is House Bill 13. So if you hear news about House Bill 13, you know, oh, That's the pay for employees of the state. Now, and this can include probation and parole officers. This includes people that work for the legislature, the people that write the bills and the lawyers and things like that. This includes people that administer like the public assistance programs and things like that. Okay, so the state employee pay plan, this is negotiated between those employees and specifically the Public Employee Union, the Montana Federation of Public Employees, and the governor. And it is negotiated outside of the legislative session, usually like December before the session begins. But then the legislature has to approve it. Several times in the last few sessions, the legislature has not approved that plan as it was negotiated, or they will make changes to it, and then, those workers just kind of have to live with whatever the legislature decides. Okay, but again, it is negotiated by the governor. This one was negotiated by Governor Bullock before he left office. I believe that it calls for like a 55-cent per hour raise or something like that. But then the legislature has to basically rubber stamp it and say, yes, this is okay, or no, we're going to make changes to this. And the employees can just walk or deal with it. So again, state employee pay plan, House Bill 13. So again, as you're reading news about the legislature, you could go, oh, HB 13. That's the state employee pay plan. There you go. Okay, so the legislature, as we said, meets for no longer than 90 days during odd-numbered years. There are situations where the legislature can be called into what's known as a special session. So that's any time outside of their regular session where something comes up that needs to be dealt with by the legislature. A lot of this stuff in a state like Montana is done by the governor and the state sort of administrative heads of departments and the Secretary of State and the state auditor and the Attorney General and all that stuff. A lot of those decisions get, they're just executive actions. But like if there's some kind of budget crisis, for example, then the legislature could be called back into session. That can happen. Either the governor can say, hey, legislature, get back here. You need to work on this. Or members of the legislature can get together, and this has become easier in the era of email and things like that. They can, by written request of a majority of members of the legislature, they can impanel a special session all on their own. Typically, these are limited to certain topics. So, it is to deal with a budget shortfall. It is to deal with there was too many fires in the state and now we have to rebalance the budget. Typically it's budget stuff. 9 times out of 10, it's budget. Okay. But again, they can be called into special session. Now, when the legislature is not in session, they have committees that do meet, not constantly, but from time to time, legislators are part of committees that meet when the legislature is not in session. We call that time period between the end of the regular session and the start of the next session. So from basically April 20th or so, 2021 to January 4th or whatever it is going to be, 2023. We call that the interim, okay, because we're in between sessions. And so there are committees that meet to study, typically it's to study particular issues. And this list here is actually very consistent. They have had this same group of committees the last several interims. There have been times where there's something special, like a couple years ago there was an interim committee on school funding for example. That even though you would think the education committee could study that, they had a special committee on that topic. There was one about public defenders. There was an issue with the public defender system in Montana. Those, by the way, are all state employees. So the legislature had a special committee to study that during the interim. So, and these committees are made up of members of both the House and the Senate. Just because you're on the education committee during the regular session does not mean you're going to be on the interim education committee. That is chosen by the leadership of both houses. In both parties, and also oftentimes is, there are certain legislators that go, I really don't have time to be part of an interim committee. They're not going to appoint you if you don't have the time to serve. But if you can come to Helena for a meeting once every couple of months, take a day off of work, they'll appoint you. So children, families, health and human services, economic affairs, education, energy and telecommunications, environmental quality council, information technology planning council, that should have a capital P, I apologize, law and justice, local government, revenue, state administration and veterans affairs, state tribal relations, transportation, and water policy. Revenue and transportation used to be one committee and they split them up. But other than that, this list is very consistent interim to interim. And most legislators serve on at least one interim committee. And like I said, they meet maybe once a month, probably less than that, once every 3 months. They're not meeting all the time. Okay, so other things you should know. The Montana legislature is what we call a citizen legislature. That means that all of the representatives in the Montana legislature are, they have other jobs typically. You can't make a living as a Montana legislator. There's just you only get paid for the session. And if you do interim work, you'll get paid for the days when you're meeting in the interim. But the pay is not like super duper, and they don't meet all year. They meet every other year for 90 days. So the compensation isn't enough where you could go, oh, I'm going to quit my job and be a legislator. You can't do that in Montana. You can do that in a state like New York or California. Those folks make like over $100,000 a year. Montana, if you do the math and you factor in $92.46 a day and that's salary, and $120.11 a day of per diem, so that's like covering meals and lodging and things like that for those people that don't live in Helena itself. We're talking a grand total for each 90-day session. You could make up to $19,131. Bear in mind that you have to basically move to Helena for 3 months to be a legislator. So that has a cost. You're eating out more. It's not a cheap thing. A lot of legislators are retired. They don't have another job just because they've already worked 30 years. But for the most part, like a lot of teachers end up being legislators. Like if I wanted to run for legislature, I could get time off from my teaching job and go and be a legislator in Helena and then come back and have my teaching job. A lot of employers are going to do that because, having a legislator as an employee, probably not a bad idea. But I would guess if you're like an employee at, say, McDonald's, they're probably going to be less thrilled to, oh, you can, not come to your shifts for 3 months and go serve in the legislature, come back and you'll have a job. I would guess that that's probably less okay. But yeah. So the other thing that the legislature has going for it, if you are a legislator, is that you can, for $30 a month, buy into the state employee health insurance plan. I wish I only paid $30 a month for my health insurance. That would be a pretty sweet deal. So yeah, $30 premium per month, And as a legislator, you can have state employee health insurance for the length of your term. So if you're elected to a term in the House of Representatives, you can have that for basically 2 years. And then if you win re-election, you get to keep it. If you don't, then you don't get to keep it. But that's a heck of a perk, really, especially because you don't make a ton as a legislator otherwise. All right, so the journal topic for this week, and I know this looks kind of long, but you can answer this fairly briefly. When does the Montana legislature regularly meet? That's part one. Part two, how long is a regular session? 3, what is the top priority for the Montana legislature in each session? And finally, do you think Montana should have a professional legislature? So basically, should we have a legislature that meets all year and that's all those people do for a living, instead of a citizen legislature where they meet for 90 days and then they go back and do other jobs? Why or why not? Okay, so if you need to take a picture of that, go for it. I will post a PDF of these slides here in probably no more than half an hour. So if you want to wait and look at the PDF, you're welcome to do that too. Are there any questions about anything that we talked about today? All right. If there are no questions, I will let you be free. By the way, Peyton, you came to the wrong section. This is Montana, not US. But yeah, so you're allowed to be free. If you have something you need to talk to me about, hang out and we'll discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pretty good. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share, so take a picture if you need it now. Give you about 10 seconds. Okay, and I'm going to stop the recording.